The other day when I was asking you guys on that anticipation guide, what are some things that you used to believe that you later found out weren't true? Again, there weren't very many in here, but my second grade had a whole bunch of them. I talked about a couple of them, like the standing in the rain makes you sick. That was true. You get sick every time you took a shower. But it pissed off some people. You know, that idea that you can tell what sex a baby is going to be based on whether it sits low or high on mom. And people swear, my mom knows, she always guesses, like at least like half the time she guesses right, depending on where it's sitting. There's no correlation between how high or low a baby sits and what sex it's going to be. But there'll be people who will hear that and be like, that's not true. My mom said so, my aunt said so. Yeah, these are ideas. And a lot of times ideas, I like ideas, because ideas they sound great if you just don't think about them too much. You know, like I had this idea, for example, that I don't know if anybody in here is ticklish. Yeah, some people, there was someone last week who was so ticklish that just when I said the word ticklish, she started laughing. And she's just like, oh, just saying the word makes her ticklish. But I have a belief that the more ticklish you are, the lower your threshold for pain. So people who are very ticklish have a very low threshold for pain. People who are not ticklish at all have a very high threshold for pain. Has anybody in here never felt what it was like to be tickled? Yeah, I've never felt tickled. I'm so unticklish, I don't know what ticklish feels like. I know what it feels like if you like rub things like just brushes across your face, but that's more itchy. It isn't like, yeah, whatever sound people make. Last night I was at jiu-jitsu. There's this guy, he's this big, strong dude. I was trying to break his arm, and he didn't like that idea. So he was trying to not let me break his arm, and he was like holding on super, super strong. I'm on the side, so I took my finger, I stuck it in his ear, so he would let go of his arm. That didn't work, and he said, "That's not going to work." So I reached under his arm and tickled him, and he let go. It was just funny. He's this big, strong dude, so and then his arm broken because he laughed. But is there any correlation, by the way, at all between how ticklish a person is and their threshold for pain? No. Turns out there's no. But if you don't think about it too much, it makes sense, right? Because you would think that ticklish comes from being sensitive, and if you're sensitive, then that means that you're going to have a low threshold for pain. But no, ticklishness doesn't come from sensitivity. It comes from something else in the brain. So I have this idea that if you're ticklish, you don't have a high threshold for pain. But it isn't knowledge, it isn't true. You know, so there's a question about knowledge, like can you know something that isn't true? You can, and the truth is no, you can't. You can't know something that isn't true. You can believe something that's not true. But in order for something to be knowledge, the first stage of it is that it has to correspond to reality. It has to be true. And so we have all kinds of ideas, and especially Thomas Sowell, if you pay attention to what he's known for at the bottom, he's an economist. So he talks about economic theories. And he points out that there are things in economics that people have ideas about, but they're not true in real life. So one thing that's fascinating about this guy, if you look at that year, 1930, man, this guy has seen some things in his life. This guy grew up in a house in the South with no, during Jim Crow, with no running water, nothing like that. If we think, like the stuff that we read about in history books, this guy actually has been through. And it's amazing because the guy still gives lectures, the guy still travels, the guy still talks. And when you get a hold of someone who's that old, they have some knowledge. Yeah. Anyway, we have ideas all over the place, and there's nothing wrong with ideas. Like if you say, oh, I have an idea, such and such, somebody might say, well, yeah, but you can't prove that. Not yet. But that's where all knowledge begins. It begins with ideas. And what's amazing to me, for some reason it strikes me right now, that there's a whole universe out there. You ever kind of look at the world and think about how big the world is? Think about how much of the world you've never seen before. How much of the world you've never experienced before. It's incredible. Even if you've experienced a lot of it. This guy is almost 100 years old. He's experienced a lot of the world, and yet as much of the world as he's experienced, he's only experienced a fraction of it still. You know, there's a cave over in Vietnam that is so big, it has its own ecosystem. It has its own weather system. It can be bright and sunny outside. You go into the cave, there's a rainstorm. A rainstorm inside of a cave. That's how big the cave is. How do I know this? I've been there. Now I'm telling you this. Now, so you've heard it. Okay, you've heard it before. You can read about it. By the way, if you look it up, you can read about it. But to actually be there is something completely different. As amazing as it sounds, it's just incredible when you're standing in there and you just realize there are animals that live inside this cave that don't live outside this cave. That's how big this cave is. It's the biggest cave. I like when they say, "Oh, it's the biggest cave on the planet," and we're like, "Whoa!" And I say, "So far, we might discover a bigger one." It's like, what's the biggest mountain in the solar system? Anybody know where it is? So far that we know of, it's on Mars. This thing's enormous. The mountain is so big that if you're walking up it, it doesn't look like a mountain. It looks flat. That's how steep it ends up going. It's so big that you can't look over the edge of it. That's how tall the mountain is. You cannot look over the edge of it. It's called Mount Olympus on Mars. It's huge. There, I have not been to that one yet. But man can dream, right? I remember walking around the desert one time. This is a true story. I'm looking out over the side. I saw the damnedest thing, man. I saw this figure with the head of a man with the body of a lion coming up out of the sand. That's a true story. I've seen it. Some of you have read about it. I'm telling you about it right now. But there's something different from hearing about it and seeing a picture of it and actually standing in its shade. You know? You know what I'm talking about? What am I talking about? The Sphinx. Yeah. And you're never going to believe this. If you stand at the Sphinx and you think that that's incredible, you look out over the horizon behind it, and you're kind of like looking to see where the desert ends, but it doesn't. It's interrupted by these incredible structures. They're just coming up out of the desert, almost like a spear coming up out of the desert, man. And you think about how old those things are. That Cleopatra, who you read about, we live closer in time to Cleopatra than Cleopatra lived to the creation of those things. More time passed between their creation and Cleopatra than has passed between Cleopatra and us. And to her, those were ancient monuments. And they're still there. There was an apartment complex that was built down the street from my house. They knocked it down. So I've been there for like 30 years. You know, and yet this thing still stands, 3 of them. It's incredible. You know? How do we know that these things stand? Because they're built by knowledge, a knowledge of what works and what doesn't work. In order for it to be real and to work, that's knowledge. Otherwise, it's just an idea. So how do you find out about things that work and what they don't work? Well, you gotta test them. You gotta try them. You know, sometimes it means limping away from it. Sometimes it means that the building collapses. But sometimes it means that the thing stands for thousands of years. Maybe even 11,500 years, we might suggest right now with the pyramids. The amazing thing is the Sphinx. Here's the funny thing about the Sphinx. Anybody know who built the Sphinx? Okay, you're right. You're right. Nobody knows who built the Sphinx. There's no record of it ever being built. We have no idea who built it. That thing is so old that even the pharaohs said this is an ancient structure. One of the pharaohs, by the way, messed with it. We now know. If you ever look at it, it's a weird looking object. It's this big body of a lion, and then this little tiny human head. And you think like, why is the head so small? Oh, because they couldn't make it bigger because it would have been too heavy. No, that's not why it is. Because one of the pharaohs came over and knocked it apart and put his own face on it. It used to be the head of a lion. It used to be a big giant lion, and then he just reshaped it and put a face on it. When he did that, the thing was already thousands of years old. So we have no idea where some of these things come from, but the things I'm talking about right now is just a little tiny sliver of the things you can experience if you go to Egypt, and just one little city in Egypt. You ever think about this? How big is our solar system? Each planet has stuff to see on it, like natural structures. We have the Grand Canyon. Yeah, we have a few things like that. There's caves in Vietnam, but do we have Mount Olympus on Mars? There's all kinds of incredible things to see. And then you look out at the sky at night and you see all these stars and you realize each one of them has planets around it. And you think about how many incredible things there are to experience in the universe. I have ideas about what are there. And if you allow yourself a few moments just to wonder when you look at them, you will have some ideas too. Wouldn't it be awesome to have knowledge about what's there? To actually experience what exists elsewhere. So, I have a lot to say, but I'm going to stop. Questions, comments, concerns, complaints, criticisms, critiques. Dope. Happy Thursday.